start out with a land acknowledgement, so we're gonna keep that trend going. So, land acknowledgements are super common now, and so Delridge is located, so Delridge is the neighborhood development nonprofit that we work for, and it's located in Delridge, right? And so that's on Duwamish and Suquamish and Muckleshoot lands traditionally, and we do this tribal land acknowledgement to acknowledge that these tribes like thrived and lived on these landscapes in a reciprocal way for thousands and thousands of years, and that the land acknowledgements serve as a reminder, like really of the realistic consequences of settler colonialism on Native peoples, and and as like a reminder of the work that we all need to take part in, because the land acknowledgements aren't going to be enough until Native people all have a seat at every table in their policy and decision making on their land. And we all need to take part in the work in order to get them and all Native people's agency over their lands. Yeah, okay, sorry, I'm a little scattered from that intro, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about DNDA, which is the organization that's putting the workshop on. It's Delridge Neighborhoods Development Association, and we try to like uplift community through access to art, nature, and neighborhood. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Steve and Demarus, who are our main presenters for today, and they're going to co-present on pollinators and cool happenings around the area. Take it away.
Thank you. I'll just kind of give a brief introduction of myself and of the organization I work with, and then I'll hand it over to Demarus. So thanks for having us today, and thanks for everyone for joining in. We love this topic. My name is Steve Dorsch. I'm the field director for the Common Acre, and the Common Acre works to restore relationships between people and the land through agriculture, ecology, and art. And we do that work through some of our programming that we'll talk a little bit about today, as we work in the pollinator habitat restoration world via our programs at the Green Line, as well as with the Flight Path Project. And the Green Line is a collaboration with Seattle City Light, and so our pollinator habitat restoration work happens in their right-of-way. So they own a lot of land throughout the region. And so if you're familiar with the high voltage lines, all that area underneath it is considered the right-of-way. So they own it and maintain it. And we thought, wouldn't it be a wonderful use of space to do something a little bit different to utilize that land better? And so the Green Line Project, we have our Bangor site that is about 5 acres under restoration, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on in the presentation. And the goal there is to with native plants, produce some wonderful habitats for pollinators and for people to come enjoy. So we'll get more into that as well. And the Flight Path is a project that's located just south of SeaTac Airport. And so that's a collaboration with the Port of Seattle, which is the landowner there. And that is a old golf course that we've converted into some wonderful pollinator habitat, as well as some really cool honeybee production there as well. So we'll get into all that a little bit more, as well as some other things that the Common Acre does. But with that, I will pass it over to Demarus to give an introduction and probably launch into a little bit more about bees.
Hi, my name is Demarus Tevuk, and I am Inupiaq. I was born in Nome, Alaska, and we moved around a lot. We moved to Washington State in '92, and this is the longest I've ever lived in one place. But I kind of like to explain where I've come from, that I've lived here for a long time. I've really gotten to know native plants. And I just recently joined the Common Acre as a board member. And before that, I was contracting with the Common Acre to teach native bee classes for kids through the Seattle libraries. I did that I guess it was the summer of 2018 or 2019. For about almost 4 years, I was working at a small local company called Crown Bees, and I produced educational content for them. So that included training materials for how to raise mason bees and leafcutter bees. And I was also managing their social media accounts, and I would read news articles and white papers, research papers about bees in general. So out of all of that work, I created a PowerPoint about how to save native bees. And because I was working in like customer service and answering questions, I really got to know kind of the misconceptions that people have about bee behavior and bee life cycle. So that's where the presentations came out of all of this work. And I don't work at Crown Bees anymore, but I still love to talk about native bees, pollinators, and native plants. I'm currently working as an engagement strategist for Sustainable Seattle, who is actually celebrating their 30th year this year. Sustainable Seattle was founded in 1991 by a dedicated group of citizens who wanted to make sustainability work community owned. And they actually got a lot of awards when they were first founded for producing some reports called sustainability indicators. I know I don't have the name like memorized, but it's about sustainability indicators for communities. That model was actually emulated by a few hundred different initiatives around the world. In North America, there was actually about like 170 sustainability indicator projects, and more than half of them were inspired by Sustainable Seattle's work. So yeah, Sustainable Seattle is a small local nonprofit. We do monthly events, and I'm also managing the social media accounts. And through them, I talk a lot about my research about defining sustainability from the indigenous perspective. I'm also working part-time for Beacon Business Alliance. And through that work, I'm also supporting Rainer Ave Business Coalition. So I guess I just kind of like to explain what we're going to do today. I have a presentation called, I think it's called Native Bees for Kids or something. We're going to go through that one because we can take a break partly like early on, and we can all draw the parts of a bee together. So if you have paper nearby, I thought it would be fun for us to learn all the different body parts of a bee, and like that will help us get to know bees really well, because we're going to know how many eyes they have, because insects can have more than 2 eyes, and then all of their body parts and how they use them. So, and also I also want to point out, usually when I give a presentation, I wait for questions at the end, but I don't know how we want to like interrupt and offer chances for people to ask questions. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know how we want to do that, but also Stephen, if you want to interrupt me and talk about the Common Acres work.
Sure, I can kind of hop in here and there, and as well as I can maybe be if people want to pop things in the chat a little bit, I can be kind of keeping things going there while Demarus is giving her presentation. We can also do a little bit of that, and I also before we dive into it, want to shamelessly plug our bee guide, which is available on our website, and it really is a cool resource. And it's just really great, all about our native bees and a little bit about the habitats. And it supports our work. And I have found it to be a really cool thing to have with me when I'm out, even in just the garden, whatever your favorite place to kind of observe what's going on out there. And I'll give you, it's got some really cool bee pictures, and it's got a really cool, so I can cheat on my bee drawing, y'all, because I've got this guide with me here. So anyway, I can talk more about the guide at any point as well.
Yeah, I actually, like, towards the end, I have slides about local resources, and the Common Acre and the bee guide is one of the examples. So you can show it again when I do that slide. So we share, and let me know if you can. Oh, every time the button. Okay, the button always covers up. Sometimes, like, can everybody see the presentation? Okay, because sometimes lately I had to figure out, like, I have to present it in a certain way in order for people to see the slides. So this is the native. Okay, good. So this is the native bees class for kids, and it's actually like really full of information. I think adults will find it interesting too. So these are the things that we'll talk about. Like, it's really about how to really save the bees. So first, talk about bee life cycle and behavior so that we can understand what they're doing throughout the year and where they're nesting. We'll talk about the different kinds of nesting habitats that native bees use. Reasons to avoid lawn chemicals. Why we should grow native flowering plants. But remind me, Stephen, later that we should also talk about, like, non-flowering native plants. And then some local bee resources. So, like, places like the Common Acre that we can connect with, that they're doing work to help native bees. So why is pollination important? For a lot of trees and grasses, they do wind pollination, where, like, right now, you have pollen on your car because the pollen is the sperm part of the plant sex life, and it's just being spread throughout the air, and the pollen is small and lightweight, and it floats through the air and lands on the female part of the tree or grass. But for flowers, the pollen grains are too big to just fly through the air, and flowers evolved to use animal pollinators to help them carry that heavy pollen from one flower to another flower. So I like to start with a brief history of bees. So ants and wasps, actually, they share a common ancestry. If you think about it, ants and wasps are both social. They both have social structures that we know really well. And for ants and wasps, the larvae need a source of protein in order to grow their bodies and become an adult. So around 135 million years ago, a wasp became vegetarian, and that's how we got bees. So instead of feeding insects to their larvae, they're feeding pollen as a source of protein. Pollen has protein and fat and vitamins. It's got a bunch of stuff in it. And flowers and bees, over all of that time, they've evolved together. So you think about how we have a big diversity of flowers, there's also actually a huge diversity of bees. So, so the bee larvae, they're eating a mixture of pollen and nectar. And like I said, the pollen is a source of protein, fat, and vitamins. It's been a while since I've given this presentation, so I might, like, skip ahead and, like, say things out of order. The adult bees are only eating nectar. Hold on a second. Okay, so the adult bees are only eating nectar, and the nectar is a source of energy or sugar for the bees. So hold on a second, let me. I'm trying to fix my, how do I do this? Okay, this thing is kind of covering up my slides for me, but I like being able to see everyone's faces also. So bee diversity, that means like every bee has a role to play. Bees actually come in a whole like huge range of sizes. This photo is from, I wish I had the book in person to show you. My favorite reference book is called The Bees in Your Backyard. It's co-authored by Dr. Joseph Wilson. I think he's from University of Utah, but that bee on the quarter is a carpenter bee, and they're among like the biggest bees in the world. And then to show the size difference, that little tiny bee is from the Paradiddha genus, and they're usually found in the desert. They're about the size of George Washington's nose on the quarter. So bees come in like a really huge range of sizes. And the reason why they're different sizes is because they're living in different environments, and they're feeding on different kinds of flowers. And you know, they're all filling a role in the ecosystem that they live in. So this is the cover of my favorite book. I wish I had it. It's really great. It has like 900 photos in it. It's like an encyclopedia about bees. It's still not like, it's really hard to identify a bee. Like, you have to be a trained entomologist, but this is a really great book for getting you close to knowing like what kind of bee you have. What are native bees anyway? Honeybees were actually brought from Europe. A lot of people think that they were brought from Europe in order to do pollination service, but honeybees were actually brought for honey production and wax creation so that people could make candles. And also, like, honey is a sweetener, but it's also an important part of medicine. So honeybees were brought for those reasons, not to pollinate North America. Worldwide, there's actually more than 21,000 bee species. That's like, I think it's twice as many bee species as there are birds. Like, if you think about how many different birds that you see, there's actually a lot of different kinds of bees. So in North America, we have around 4,400 different native bee species. And then in Washington State, we have around 600 different bee species in our state. In the Seattle area, I think the work that the Common Acre did, they showed that during a bee survey, that we have around 100 different species here. That includes honeybees and bumblebees. I think that's what I remember from reading something.
Yeah, and we've been documenting an increase in species abundance and diversity, and so we can talk a little bit more about that as we dive into the project work. Yeah, the more you look, the more you find. And that's what's happening worldwide too, is that when we fund scientists to go out and look for different bee species, they find new species. Like, every year there's at least maybe 10 different species that scientists are finding. Like, one thing I like to point out is that, you know how I said that wasps evolved into bees? When I look up like how many different kinds of wasps are there in the world, I can't get a number. There's no estimate. There's just, the estimate is that there are hundreds of thousands of species of wasps. So like for wasps, the diversity is even bigger. And we tend not to like see insects all, like it's kind of hard. Like, they all kind of look the same to us, like, you know, but once you start getting to know the way a bee looks and how it behaves, then you're able to kind of like learn how to identify them, and like, you'll know this is a bee. So the next big question that comes up for people, they're like, wow, there's so many different kinds of bees. Are all bees social? And no, and I've tried to like make this
slide. The slide just will not come up the way I want it to, but 10% of bee species are social bees that live in hives. That includes honeybees and bumblebees. Those are social bees. But 90% of that 21,000 bees around the world are actually solitary bees that don't live in a hive. They don't have a queen. Social bees are actually the exception and not the rule for bee behavior. And that little thin line on the pie graph represents honeybees. Out of the 21,000 species, there's like 7 to 12 different species of honeybees. And I think we only, maybe we raised 2 or 3 different species of honeybees. So there's also like native stingless honeybees that are from Central America, Central and South America. And there's also like the same stingless little tiny honeybees that live in Australia, but they're tiny. It takes them a lot longer to make honey. People raise them and gather the honey from them too. But I'm just trying to point out, most native bees, they're not living like the social honeybees and bumblebees that we know so well. And another thing I like to point out is that the common knowledge about honeybees is because humans have been raising them for like 5,000 years. So if you think about how, like, if a culture has been raising something for that long, you're gonna naturally teach your kids about this is how they live and this is what they do and this is why we raise them, you know. Like it's a part of our like TV shows, like the Muppets. Like I remember like seeing like something about the Muppets about how bees live. But people tend to say, they say bees, they're talking about honeybees, but most bees don't actually live like honeybees. So that's what we're going to learn today. How do solitary bees live? If they don't have a hive or they don't have a queen, that means that every female bee is fertile. She's able to raise her own young, and she's doing all of the work by herself. She's a single mother. So she's gathering nectar and pollen, building the nest, and laying the eggs. And a lot of insects, their lifespan is really short as an adult. So they're really efficient bees, and they're staying close to wherever their nesting site is. And because they don't have a colony to protect, they don't have a queen to protect, they don't have like stores of food, they don't have eggs and pollen and nectar to protect, the solitary bees tend to be really gentle. If you're near their nesting site, they'll just wait for you to leave. Or if you're staying there forever, or some, they're just gonna start a different nesting site somewhere else. Most of the time. There are bees that have their personalities are a little more aggressive, but one thing I should talk about is people always ask about, do they sting? And actually only honeybees have the venom that they have. Like bumblebees have a different thing. And I had that same question of what the heck are, I don't think that some bees, I think they're not making venom at all. And when a bee stings you, only the female is able to do it because she's poking you with her egg-laying stinger, her ovipositor. So sometimes, and honeybees, they've evolved so that they sting you, and then when they leave, the stinger stays, and then some of their guts come out, and then the honeybee dies because they're giving up their life in order to protect the colony. But most native bees, that doesn't happen. It's not barbed, so they just sting you, they poke you, and then they can fly off. Looks like, are there questions?
So it looks like Martha asked, why do they sting? Which is a great question. Sorry to steal your role, Steve.
So for honeybees, they're protecting the queen and all of the eggs and all of the honey and all of the hard work that they did. They've evolved to protect it. So for honeybees, they are aggressive, and that's why they're stinging. For most of the time, for a native bee, if they're stinging you, it's because you're really close to their nesting site, or you swatted them, or they got caught in your clothing. I've handled mason bees and I've been stung, and it was because was annoying the bee. Like I was handling them the wrong way, and she got mad and stung me in the middle of my hand. And it hurt because it's a pokey little thing. Like it's not like it's a fairly big, like, you know, it's not like a splinter. They don't pump venom into you, I don't think. So it hurt for about 10 minutes. And the next day I couldn't even see where she had stung me. One time I was picking raspberries, and honeybee, I didn't, like, it was on the berry, drinking juice from the berry because it's summertime, and you know, it's a source of sugar and stuff. And I touched it accidentally, and it stung me on the tip of my finger. My finger was swollen for 3 days and throbbing, and it hurt so bad because of that venom in there. And I was trying to find out, like, how do I make this pain go away? Like meat tenderizer, like all of these, like, you know, homemade cures. So yeah, it's just, it really comes down to like what their role is, like what they want to do, if like what their goal is. So for honeybees and bumblebees, they're social, they're protecting the colony, they can be a little more aggressive. I think bumblebees are gentler than honeybees. And also, like, the way that bumblebees life cycle works is a little different. But yeah, for solitary bees, they're only living for so long, and they're not going to give up their individual lives to save their brood. So I hope that makes sense. I think everybody has a story about interacting with the bee. And like, did you want to say something, Steve?
I just wanted to say that from my experience, you know, now observing, you know, native bees and just working around them a bit more, is that, yeah, they just they're not as motivated, I think, distinct, because like, as Demarus was saying, they're not trying to protect anything really other than their like habitat, which is usually not threatened by our presence. So yeah, they're just not as aggressive. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, and even with bumblebees and things like that, I mean, they're pretty laid back as well. I was actually just holding one the other day because it had gotten injured, and yeah, so mm-hmm. It really depends. I think a lot of our, you know, childhood memories and different things of getting stung is usually because we were doing something probably not wise, but it was probably also, yeah, like it was a honeybee or you know. Anyway, so it really depends on the experience, but I think that the native bees and the sort of mason bees, different things like that are starting to that I've been working around. Yeah, usually they're not trying to sting you.
I just have a follow-up
you can.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. When I was little, I was told that bees can only sting you once, and then their stingers fall off. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true for honeybees, because they evolved to have a barbed stinger. So there's a stinger, and they have little hooks that go opposite directions. So once they go into your skin, it's stuck, and then when they pull away, the venom producing organ comes out of their abdomen, and it continues to pump. It doesn't always like fall out, but it's designed to like continue to pump venom into you. So that, and also, you know, I actually, have you ever seen those videos of the giant Asian hornets, like in their natural habitat, they like to go and eat honeybees. Mm-hmm. I think that honeybees and those wasps, that's the predator that they're actually trying to protect their hive against, because that's what's actually coming around all the time. Like bears also, but I think that they're designed to sting the wasp and like try to pump that stuff into there. And now I'm gonna regret bringing up that topic, because people are scared about the giant murder hornets. Like, I think it's a goofy name.
Murder hornet.
The state is doing a really good job of monitoring their presence. They've got in the areas where they've been found, they've been recruiting people to put up traps, and like they're going out and looking for them. If you think about like today, hopefully when we go through all like the life cycle and stuff, hopefully you'll have less fear about what's going on with them, because you're going to understand how bees live, and then you can understand a little bit about how wasps live too. Yeah, so I really think that the bee stinging thing is really to protect against those, because they actually go into the nest and try to eat things, and then the honeybees, they evolve to swarm and ball on the invader, and they're trying to sting that invader. I think we can move on, but definitely like it's a subject that comes up.
There's one more follow-up question. Oh, okay, cool. So
Yeah,
got it. Well, I guess Martha asked, are hornets and wasps a type of bee, and how are they different? So 2 questions.
No, they are not bees, because hornets and wasps are hairless, and they are similar in that, like I said, hornets and wasps and bees, they all have the same ancestry. They started from the same creature. And so hornets and wasps, they will also visit flowers. You'll find them, but it's only the adults are drinking nectar, just like adult bees. They're drinking nectar for the energy, so that they can fly and build their nest and take care of their young. But wasps are not eating pollen for protein. They're not vegetarian. They're actually hunting garden pests. So they're still good. Like we need to have them in our landscapes, so that they can help keep those pest populations down. And like that's the balance you need. You need a bunch of different things being together to do all. They're doing a role also. They're not evil. They're not bad. They're doing what they're supposed to do. And just like bees, 90% are solitary. Most wasps are also solitary. It's just that we know the social ones so well, because they make this big nest that we can see, and then we get scared of them because there's a whole bunch of them next to each other, and they're also aggressively protecting their nest. But most wasps that you see are actually solitary. And we're going to get to know how solitary bees live, and that will help us understand how solitary wasps live. So let's talk about where native bees nest. Around 75% of that 21,000 species around the world, they actually nest underground. And they're either digging their own, most of them are digging their own fresh new holes. Sometimes like bumblebees nest underground, they'll nest in an old rodent hole. Sometimes, even though they're solitary, sometimes they're sharing the main tunnel to get underneath. So you might see a bunch of bees going in and out, but it's kind of hard to tell if they're solitary or social. But they'll share a main tunnel, and then they have their own branches that they go off into. They prefer to nest in grassy or bare soil areas. Yeah, I have seen ground nesting bees nesting under a cedar tree that the needles are not very thick. So yeah, there's more research happening about where do native bees nest, what kind of conditions like slopes and shade, and what kind of soil. Like there's scientists are finally starting to be like, we need to know how native ground nesting bees live. So then the other 25% of bee species nest in holes. Some people call it cavity nesting. Each female bee is claiming her own nesting hole, and she works on it until it's filled, and then she goes and finds another one if she's got time. So in nature, they're nesting in standing dead trees or logs on the ground, or, and I'm gonna go into it more, the hollow stems of certain plants. It has to be the right size for them to go in there. We're gonna talk about how to like create habitat for these nesting sites for the bees, because it's not just food that they need, they also need places to make their nest. So for ground nesting habitat, what I recommend is avoiding landscape fabric, you know, the like plastic or woven stuff. Really, like you don't need that. Too much bark mulch, like you can use bark mulch, but what I recommend is like finding a sunny spot and pushing the bark mulch away so that the bees have access to the ground. I think UC Berkeley, I've been meaning to like try to connect with the scientists who said they did a paper where they're showing like an inch of bark mulch is too thick for some bees to dig through. Avoid tilling the ground, like leave a spot that's free of the landscape fabric, bark mulch, and tilling and spraying anything, because we're going to see most of the year they're living in that nesting spot. So you provide a sunny spot that's bare of all of that stuff, and then another good idea is to like don't put it in a path where you like to walk, because you're going to be like, they don't really care, but you're going to be annoyed when you're trying to walk through them. They like to live in like sandy or grassy locations. And remember, they're only active as an adult for a few weeks out of the year. So if they are in a place that's inconvenient for you, just wait for them to finish building their nest. And we'll see with the life cycle what they're doing, and that it's not really a problem. It's good that you have them in your yard. Was there a question?
I was just putting a finer point on the no plastic landscape fabric to avoid that, please.
Yeah. And at the Common Acre Greenline site, you provided a nesting spot because you're restoring the land. That means like removing the grass and the invasive plants, but you're doing it with cardboard mulching. So you gotta like leave some empty spots for the bees to be able to get into the ground.
Yeah, and that's a common, and we'll like Demarus said, we'll get into all this later more, but that is a common question as to like, well, what do we do if we can't I'll tell all the things we can't do, what can we do? And so we'll talk more about all the things, all the good approaches. There's lots of really great ways to provide some habitat, from plants to logs and different things like that. And so more on that later on.
Yeah. So usually when you see a bee on the ground like this, she's either like coming out or she's trying to remember where her nesting spot is. I think this is a Collette's bee. And once you get to know the bees that nest in the ground, it's like kind of cool that like a couple weekends ago, I was at Discovery Park and a mining bee had landed on the whatchamacallit, the table that we were sitting at, and I like watched it sit in the sun for a couple of minutes. Yeah, the bees that nest in the ground, a lot of their common names is mining bee. Oops. Okay, so bumblebees, they're the only social bee native to North America. There are 23 species in Washington state. The colony size for a bumblebee is a lot smaller. At most, during the height of their activity, they have around 200 to 400 individuals in a colony. And for honeybees, that number like minimum is 10,000 usually. I mean, they can start out with a smaller colony, but they usually have around 10,000 individuals. So the colony size is a lot different. And the way their life cycle works is that there is a new bumblebee queen every spring. So right now, most of the bumblebees that you're seeing, that they're really big, they're a queen. They're starting to grow their colony for this year. There's a new colony every year. For honeybees, the queen can live 4 to 7 years. So bumblebees are a little different than honeybees. They like to nest underground in old rodent holes, or sometimes they'll nest in an empty birdhouse, which I think is pretty cute. But they do need, they like to put like fuzzy grass or stuff like padding and insulation in there. And bumblebees they do something called flower constancy. So they will go to the same kind of flower. They'll like feed on that one, go to another yard, feed on that same kind of flower. So I forget the name of this. I didn't plant these flowers in my yard. I think it's like Button, William Button or something. But if you sit and watch bumblebees, you'll see them going to the same plant throughout your yard. They like go to a heather and go to another heather, and so they do that for a little while, and then they find the next thing that's like, oh, there's a lot of this. I'm going to go to the blueberry plant now. and go to another blueberry plant. So that's part of what makes them really great pollinators. So the bee that I know the most because of crown bees are hole nesting bees. A reminder that they are solitary. They are easy to raise if you need to add them to your orchard or farm. They're great for agriculture because they behave differently than honeybees. You can do a really targeted pollination, and also like the way they live, like they're actually better pollinators. So we can provide nesting habitats for them, nesting and forage habitat for them, easier than ground nesting bees. Ground nesting bees, we don't know so well because you have to like provide the right kind of conditions in the ground. You can't dig up ground nesting bees and go and put them in the ground in your, like, you just kind of have to provide for them and let them come. So the ones that we know the best are mason bees, leafcutter bees, and then this is a picture of a mast bee from Hawaii, which a few years ago, they were in the news because they were listed as endangered. It was the first time that a bee had been listed as endangered. And the mast bees are also hole nesting. So where do hole nesting bees live? I like to point out that it's a bee house, it's not a hive because they're solitary. And also it's not really a hotel because they live there. They're not coming in for the night and going somewhere else. They're doing all of their nesting in that spot. Most hole nesting bees are nesting in pre-made holes. They do not have the time to eat wood into your house. They are not harming your homes. Even carpenter bees, which we don't really have in Washington State, when they chew into wood, they reuse that nesting hole every year because it takes them so long. Every day they can only chew like 1/4 of an inch deep into. So it really bugs me when I see all of these like traps to kill carpenter bees because we really shouldn't be doing that. They're like excellent pollinators. We should be providing them, like, sacrifice some barn wood to let them nest in there. They're not like termites. They're not eating the wood. They're going to reuse that nesting hole each year. Anyway, so they nest in dead wood, like standing dead trees, logs on the ground. They can also nest in hollow grasses and stems of plants that have that hollow thing. And they're preferring a diameter of nesting hole that's just right for them. Like, they don't want something too loose. So like they're usually picking something where their bodies just fit inside of that nesting hole. So we got to provide a variety of nesting hole sizes. I will point out though, bees tend to be pretty small. Anything bigger than, like, if you can stick your finger into a nesting hole, then that's too big. I've seen, you know how bee hotels became really popular? I've seen bamboo tubes that are this big, and there are no bees that big. Like, the picture that I saw on this newspaper was like a giant tube and a frog was sitting in there. It was like, a bee is not going to nest in there. So make sure that you're picking something that's about the size of a pencil. I have some more tips about like how to pick out a bee hotel too. Because most companies, they don't really know anything about bees. They're just like, oh, here's the thing that everyone's into. We're gonna make a bamboo bee house, and they don't actually know what they're doing. So the hole nesting bees, they're nesting in one hole at a time. The female bee is gonna sleep in there at night. When she's done and filled up the thing, then she'll move on to a new nesting hole. So we can provide hole nesting habitats. Remember, you can deadhead standing dead trees, leave logs on the ground, plant native bushes and grasses for habitat. You can also, if you have a cane plant or something that has like a pithy stem where it's like really soft, you can, when you go to trim, leave like 12 to 15 inches off the ground so that the bees can like have a place to nest inside of. We can provide bee hotels, but you should make sure that what you're providing is actually healthy for bees and not like made by someone who doesn't know what they're doing. So Crown bees, the place I used to work at, all of their nesting materials are designed for the health of the bees. They're the right size, they're the right kind of materials. They don't use plastic. Bamboo is not good because it's not weatherproof. And also bamboo is an exotic material from another continent. So use local natural materials. And remember, make it about the size of a pencil, the diameter inside. Avoid using drilled blocks of wood. If you're gonna make a bee hotel where you take a log and you drill holes into it, put a paper liner in there. That way you can help keep it clean, or replace it every 2 years, because I know the diseases and pests that mason bees have really well, and there's reasons why you want to provide something that you can clean, or that you can like pull out that rolled tube, so that you're helping to keep that drilled block of wood clean and safe. Anytime you aggregate a whole bunch of nesting holes together, that just means the pest can move in between really easily, and you're going to have to manage it. We can try to replicate nature, but like I like to point out, nature is changing and moving. Like a standing dead tree is going to fall over, a bear is going to come and like rip it apart, like grubs are going to come in, like there's going to be a different nesting site somewhere else. In nature, the nesting holes are far away from each other, so all of those pests and diseases are not aggregating in one location. So if we're going to build a bee hotel, we should make sure that we build management into it, because we just can't replicate nature. We're actually going to cause some problems if we don't do it the right way. So that's why we avoid drilled blocks of wood. But if you're going to do it, put a paper straw in there. Bamboo, like I said, is exotic, and it doesn't let the pollen loaf breathe. And then plastic straws are also, they're not natural, and they don't let the pollen loaf breathe, like mold can happen. If you build a bee hotel, you will have more than bees nest in there. Hole nesting, solitary wasps are also going to come. This is a picture of a mud wasp, and she's hunting caterpillars. Each hole nesting wasp has their favorite prey that they like to get. Grass carrying wasps are a really common one. They tend to hunt crickets. So it's actually kind of cool when you're managing a bee hotel and you open it in the fall to like take out the healthy cocoons. Sometimes you'll see what the wasps are feeding. Like one time at Crown Bees, we had someone that had a wasp that was feeding spiders to its young, and the young didn't like to eat the legs, so there was just a bunch of spider legs in there. I was like, okay, this was this was eating spiders. If you're going to provide a bee hotel, be prepared to manage it, and you're going to see all kinds of bugs. Like if you don't like bugs and you get grossed out, like I know people that they can't stand it, they don't want to touch anything, like then it's not for you. And you can provide nesting sites though in a more natural way, like leaving the grass stems trimmed and like putting some old logs on the ground. So anyway, that's like what I know about bee hotels. But what's inside of a nesting hole? This is a picture I took of mason bee larvae. So instead of honey, all solitary bees, they're feeding a pollen loaf that feeds each egg from egg to larva to pupa to adulthood. Like it's all the food that they need to become an adult. So the nesting chamber is made up of some kind of protective wall. For mason bees, they're using mud, that pollen loaf, and then one egg. And then it's a repeated pattern of like protection, food, egg, protection. And they start at the back of the nesting hole. And there's always like so much stuff that I feel like I need to explain about bees. The mother bee starts at the back and she lays female eggs first. Bees are able to determine the sex of their young because, I forget the term, dimorphism. So what happens is if they lay an egg that's mixed with sperm that fertilizes it, that egg is going to become female. If they just lay an egg by itself, that egg is still going to hatch. It's going to grow into a male bee. It's like mind-blowing, like how like insects work that way. So she's able to determine the sex. Like she has a special organ where she lays the egg, puts sperm with it somehow, and that's going to become a female bee. Towards the front of the nesting hole, she's just going to lay male eggs that are not fertilized because they need to come out first. Their only role is to fertilize and create female bees. They're going to come out and wait, and then they're only going to live for a couple weeks because their role is to mate, and then the female bees will come out. The capped end of the nesting hole at the front is where you can see the nesting materials that they use. At the front, they do an extra thick layer of materials to protect, to keep things from going in there. And that's right at the outside edge. So we're gonna take a break to draw the parts of a bee together. So if people want to get paper, and then I'll go through the steps of how to draw a bee, and hopefully, like I'm gonna draw with you, and hopefully you'll be able to see my drawing. So the first part is that we're gonna draw, and I'm gonna try to draw from like front, like top down, and then from the side. So we're gonna draw a head and the thorax, and I'm not a great artist when I do this. So this is like, can you see it? That's the head, thorax, and abdomen. And that's kind of how their like proportions are. They have a smaller head, like the thorax is kind of like round, and then the abdomen. If you think about the way wasps and ants are, they have this skinny little neck in between each thing, but for bees, they're like pretty fat and right next to each other. So that's top down. And then, oh, it's been a while since I've done this, so I'm gonna draw the head, body. It's like kind of similar for this side view. Hopefully it will make sense. Okay, so next, on the head, bees have 5 eyes altogether. So they have 2 big eyes on the side, and at the side of their head. And then at the top of their head, they have 3 simple eyes. Those are called ocelli. I'm doing it a little wrong. So from top view, that's the way it kind of looks. Actually, I've got that backwards. Anyway, there's 3 simple eyes on the top of their head in between those eyes. So then from the side view, their eyes look like, and from the side view, their eyes are kind of almond shaped and they're really big. So then like from the side view, that's the top of the head, and then that's where the eyes are. And there's a little cluster of them at the top. The bees use the 3 ocelli to polarize light. And when the eyes polarize light, they're reading the polarized light to tell time of day and direction. And when I would post like facts every year for crown bees, there was always this one guy who would like correct me on how I'm talking about that. And I'm like, he was a physicist, I guess, who was like, the way you're explaining it is not right. It's kind of like having polarized sunglasses. So the reason why I like to talk about that is if you have a greenhouse and the greenhouse material is blocking UV light, what the bee is doing is polarizing UV light. And if you get rid of that, then it can't read, the direction. So it's kind of like wearing have you ever put 2 pairs of polarized glasses on? You can't see out of them. Like one is like making the light that way, and the other one's, it blocks it out and you can't see it. So when you make a greenhouse, make sure that it doesn't block anything. It lets all the different kinds of light go through the greenhouse material. So then next we're gonna draw the antenna. The antenna come out and there's a little bend in them, and the antenna are pretty long. Let's see. So this is gonna look kind of goofy, but this is the way the antenna work on their heads. And male bees actually have way longer antennae. I think they're using them to find the females. And then female bees, they're using the antenna to detect water, nectar, sometimes like mud. We don't really know how it works either, if it's smell or electrical currents or something. But I like to tell the story that I was taking care of mason bees, like fiddling with them in their bee house, making sure they were coming out and ready to pollinate my apple tree. I had this like kind of weak female that was hungry, and I was putting her on a flower, apple flower. I turned around to do something, and 10 seconds later, I turned around to see like, how is she doing? She's on the flower, is she feeding and everything? A male bee had come from somewhere and landed on her and was like initiating the mating thing. They are very efficient at finding females. Okay, so then next, there's 2 sets of wings, and they're attached on the thorax. And let's see, it's been so long since I've drawn this. But the 2 sets of wings are actually like hooked together. So that's like top view. There's a special like little hook that connects them together to each other, so that even though they have like 4 wings all together, it looks like 2 because of the way that they're always hooked together. And scientists will use the wing shape. Oh, also I want to point out, to tell the difference between a bee and a fly is that when bees are resting, the wings are like really, I didn't draw this right, but they're like flush against the body. And for a fly, they leave them like winged out, like really wide. So that's one way to tell between when you're watching insects. So then let's see from the side view. I'm not doing a great job of, but like from the side view, it's like when they're folded, they're kind of like, you know, they're kind of like a cape, like pressed against their body. Also from the thorax, they have 6 legs, and they're all attached to that thorax. So there's one that goes forward, and then there's a mid leg, and then usually the hind leg is longer. My drawing like might be kind of hard to see what's going on, but oh, here the front leg like comes forward, and there's a middle leg, and then the back leg kind of goes back. I also like to point out, if you see from the picture that I found, they have cute little feet. They have these cute little toes that they use to grab onto things. So I always like to draw the little tiny feet. And I love looking at the pictures under the microscope of their little tiny toes. I know I'm using, like, the scientists have a name for the feet, and I don't have it right. The most important thing about a bee is that they have pollen carrying hairs. So let me like draw the legs. How do the legs go? Oops. Okay. My picture is not great. Let me do, okay. Okay. I said I was doing top down, but now like on the abdomen, I'm gonna draw. So draw it in a weird way. For mason bees, the special pollen carrying hair that they evolved to have is on their abdomen. So on the underside of their abdomen, they have it's called scopa. They have these ridges of hair. It's not gonna, I'll draw it from the side also, so that you can see what I'm talking about. When you're hanging out with a mason bee and you're looking at them, you can see these little ridges of hair. It's like really cute, really funny looking. Like, and then also like when you watch them, when they put the pollen into those ridges, or from this view, there's going to be like, it's going to be all over the belly, and it's going to be packed in between the ridges. For honeybees, like we can draw a weird hybrid bee if you want. For honeybees and bumblebees, they have a special structure on the back leg. That's the pollen basket. So it's an extra thick plate leg, plate on the hind leg. And for some of the ground nesting bees that are really like big and fat. I wish we had, I don't think we really have them here in Washington State, but they look like teddy bears. They're like super cute. I don't know if I'm gonna. So for honeybees and bumblebees, it's called a corbicula. So they have this like wide plate, and then they have special hairs that like, they're almost like whiskers. They come up, and then, so then from the side view, like that plate, and then there's these special hairs at the knee that come up and like towards the body. That is when you, I think I've got pictures of when a honeybee or a bumblebee, what they do is like they clean off the pollen from their bodies. They still have hair all over. It's just like the special hairs are on, the special thing is on their hind legs. They clean it off. They mix it with something special that scientists are still figuring out, saliva and nectar, make it wet and sticky and put it in that corbicula pocket. So that is one way that you can identify bees, like from the bee guide, is where they carry pollen on their bodies. You're looking for where is the yellow or whatever the pollen looks like. Sometimes it's pink or purple. Where is the pollen on their bodies? And that will, because the species are not this weird Frankenstein thing that I just made us draw. They have a special place where they've evolved to carry it in that way. I'm going to talk about why they evolved to be like that. But if you see a bee that's got these big, heavy, thick, like they're kind of globby looking, though, that's a honeybee or a bumblebee. If it's like spread across the leg and their legs are really hairy, that's a solitary bee. I like seeing the fat ones that have hairy legs. They're really cool looking. It's like these big like spur pants on their hind legs, like, and they look.
Yeah. Pants is the way I like to say it. They got their pants on, so it's funny to kind of watch it as the season evolves too, to see their pants get sort of chunkier.
Yeah.
For a scientific term there.
So an entomologist, if you send a picture to an entomologist and you're like, what the heck kind of bee do I have? They need to see the face. So because the way the eyes are and like where where each piece is, the shape of the face, that's important. They're also looking, the other important thing is the shape of the wings, because you see that structure, like bees have each species have a different little like angles and stuff. It's really hard to identify a bee. You need a really clear picture of the face and the wings, and sometimes like the abdomen. And sometimes scientists, they have to dissect because they have to look at the shape of the sex organs in order to determine different species. So a lot of bees look really similar, but they could be different species. But the bee guide is a fun way to like get to know like what kind of general kind of bee am I looking at. Does anyone want to share their pictures that they drew? Or does anyone have questions about the body parts? Oh, you know what? I totally forgot to make a straw for mason bees and leafcutter bees. We need to draw the jaws on the head. Mason bees and leafcutter bees, they have giant jaws. I know that sounds like scary, but I actually think like mason bees are really cute because they're like all black, and that jaw kind of looks like a beak. So like from the side, they kind of look like they look like a little raven. Like they have this cute little thing that sticks out when their jaws are closed. So mason bees and leafcutter bees and other bees that like wool carder bees, they're using those big jaws to gather the materials and carry it home. I don't remember if I have a good picture in here about what it looks like when a mason bee's got a ball of mud. They're really smart, and the way that they make their nests is really amazing. Like they're little architects. Okay, so now I want to talk about pollination, like the different ways that bees pollinate. See how I was telling you that the mason bees carry the pollen on their belly, and that they leave it, they don't clean it off because their lifespan's really short. They're very efficient. they just leave it dry and it's like all over them, and they're very messy looking. But mason bees and leafcutter bees, they carry it in that special stuff, special ridges of hair on their belly. So this is a female bee coming back to the nest. Male bees they're still hairy. They do some pollination, but they're not actively going, and they don't help take care of the nest. They're not gathering pollen. So anyway, you know for sure this is a female bee. And you can kind of see her little feet. They're pretty cute. I like to say that native bees are the original and best pollinators for our plants. They are actually 100 times more effective than honeybees. For a solitary mason bee, each female is laying around 25 to 30 eggs over her lifetime as an adult. With a social honeybee, even in the wintertime, they are laying around 1,000 eggs every day, the queen. That's a lot of babies and food that need to be fed. So like I keep saying, the solitary bees are really efficient. They only fly around 300 feet away from their nesting site every day. But because of this like big population for honeybees, they have to fly farther and farther away to get that source of nectar and pollen for their hive, for their colony. So they can fly around like 3 to 5 miles from the hive. Mason bees keep the pollen loose and dry on their hairy bellies. That means every time they land in a flower, they like squish around and they put that pollen in there. It's dry, so it's falling off and it's transferring to a new flower. But like I was saying, the honeybee, they clean off their bodies and then pack it wet. So this is a picture of that corbicula structure with it's like, you can tell it's like sticky and hard. So it's this little packet of pollen. And the reason why they're doing that is if they have to fly 3 to 5 miles back home, you don't want to drop anything that you just spent all this time working on. So they're flying really long distance back with this nice solid packet of pollen. So I like to say that mason bees are really excellent pollen spreaders, and honeybees are really good long-range pollen carriers. I think mason bees are about 95% of the time that they're visiting a flower, that flower is going to get pollinated. I think for honeybees, the number is closer to 5%. The reason why honeybees are used, though, is because the sheer number of honeybees, like you have way more individuals going and working on the same flowers. That's why they're able to pollinate our farms. I also like to talk about the flight habits. So for a social honeybee, they're really organized. They're talking to each other about here's the next place to go to gather pollen. They're really thorough and they're on a mission. I've heard stories that they've tracked the same bee going to the same tree, working meticulously, like going, I'm doing this branch. I'm going to do this branch, go back home, go back to the same tree, work on another branch. So they're a long distance pollinator. There's also like research that shows that the pollen transfer happens inside the honeybee hive, where one individual brought something from one tree and like accidentally rubbed against another bee who went to a different tree somewhere else. I hope that makes sense. So, but with solitary, so they can fly around from one flower to the hive, like 5 miles or a little longer sometimes. Solitary native bees, they're working alone and they can meander to whatever they like. I wish I had a good slide to show this, but scientists know that bees can read electric current on a flower. So I think it's electromagnetic. They can read a signal because a plant is in the ground, it's grounded, it's not negative, but it's like neutral electricity, right? And when a bee is flying through the air, it's picking up a positive charge. Just like if you rub a balloon on your head, that's creating a charge, like a bee's flying through the air, creating a charge, the positively charged. They land on the flower, that positive charge is transferred onto the flower, and then the bee can tell how long ago another bee had visited this flower. Honeybees can do this too, but they don't care. They're like, I'm going every flower on this branch. But mason bees, they're like, I'm not gonna waste my time. Like someone landed on that recently. They go to a different flower that hasn't been visited yet. So they're meandering through the landscape and they're paying attention to this electromagnetic whatever that we can't see, and we don't even know how they see it. So they're independent, they're visiting flowers that are ready to be visited. I think they can all, they use that information to tell how long ago has it been. The flower has to recharge pollen or nectar. So they're visiting whatever is ready to be visited. It's like the prime, like maximum amount of food. That makes them really great pollinators. It's not just like how they carry the pollen, it's like how they behave in the landscape when they're going to whatever is best. So the mason bees, they're meandering within about 300 feet of the nest, and they're going to different flower sources. So now I'm going to talk about the different kinds of bees that we know and the kind of the roles that they play and like the time of year when they're active. Spring mason bees are the first bees to emerge in the spring. They fly in 10-degree cooler weather than honeybees. They also fly in light rain. They won't fly in heavy rain, but honeybees are more like fair weather friends. You know, they're like, I'm not leaving if it's yucky out. So they don't fly as, you know, the conditions have to be better for honeybees to leave their hive. And they can wait it out too because of the stores of food. Mason bees, I like to say that they're really built for spring. They have this dark color, dark blue, almost black. So in the spring when the weather is cooler, why are they black? It's to absorb like my shirt. Like if you're wearing black outside in the summer, like you're gonna get hot because the black is absorbing all of the light, all of the energy. So they warm up. They this is technical, but the bodies have to actually be 85 degrees or so. They can fly in 55. Part of it is like the way, like bumblebees, they also like kind of shake their thorax, like they get warmed up, but it's also that body color is helping them warm up to fly. Honeybees are amber colored. They don't have that dark color. The mason bees are hibernating as adults. So as soon as springtime comes and all the conditions are right, they're like, I'm ready to go. They come out of the nesting hole. They're ready to start nesting. They're also using mud, which is plentiful here in the springtime. Do we have a question or comment?
It's just from me. I was
Okay.
saying that buzz to like illustrate that they like wiggle to keep it warm, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
Yeah. If you hear that sound, it's them like shaking all their muscles and getting warm. That's part of what they're doing.
And I also I left a comment. I was just asking about the way that like sorry, this is also pretty technical, but like the light spectrum that pollinators can see. I've heard that they often, or that they have the ability to see like UV light, and that sometimes plants and flowers have evolved to like create UV patterns to like help draw them in. I was wondering if you know about that.
Yeah.
I just touched on it a little bit. So they do emit some longer wavelengths of light, I think is the way that I kind of can understand it a little bit. And that and so sometimes it's just like the way light is maybe reflecting off of them that they seem to glow, but other times I think that like as far as that's what our eyes are seeing is this like sort of seemingly glowing light. But I do think that, I mean, Demarus, I don't know if you can talk about what the bee is seeing, but I think that it's definitely different than what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. So for them, the range of colors, they don't see red as well. So it's more that, I think that's a shorter, like it's more, red is like a longer wavelength.
Yeah, it's longer.
And then UV is like really short wavelengths. So they're seeing in the UV more, so that flowers look totally different to them. Like a white flower can have this UV range that we can't see. And then they also like blue because that's in that like purple and blue. So that's, if you build a bee hotel, you can paint it blue and that will attract the bees to the house.
And that's really interesting.
I think, have you seen where?
Yeah. Because I feel like predominantly like flowers will be like white or yellow, or I feel like that's like yellow flowers are like everywhere, right? And so it's interesting that the
Yeah.
other end of the color
Yeah.
spectrum is what attracts them the most.
Yeah. So flowers, yeah. So flowers that tend to be red are attracting, usually they're attracting hummingbirds or something that can see the red. And like the shape, like if you think about like a honeysuckle, like orange, or some of the flowers are red and they're tubes, like really long tubes, and only the hummingbird can fit its long tongue in there. Oh, so have you seen, I really should include it as a slide, but some photographer had figured out, I think they're using a black light and then like a yellow filter, and somehow that combo makes it so that you can see more like the way a bee sees. So like these flowers look psychedelic, like they're glowing, and the pollen is different in that lighting, where it's this bright yellow, like this is where to go. I've also seen studies where they're looking at flowers in the forest where there's something about the coloring so that they absorb heat in a certain way, and then they attract the bees, like come and you'll warm up on my flower. So there's all kinds of stuff that we don't even know what's going on. And part of what I like to do with these classes is to like talk about how incredibly smart bees are. They have these really interesting lives, that they have memory, they have their own like thing that they're doing. They're really smart. I don't know if later on I will go over the really interesting facts about bees that are just cool to know. Okay, so then alfalfa leafcutter bees are interesting too. They are not from North America. They were actually brought from Spain, but North America is the only place that raises them commercially because they saved the alfalfa seed production in the 1940s. What happens is the alfalfa bee, let's see, the alfalfa bee. The alfalfa flower is like shaped like this, and there's a keel on the bottom, like the flower's closed. When a bee lands on this part, the top part opens and hits the bee on the head. It's like the structure like pops open and goes. There's PBS deep look videos that really show how this works. They do like these slow motion videos. Alfalfa bees don't mind, like they're actually a little smaller than honeybees. They come along, land on there, don't care that they're being hit on the head. Honeybees avoid opening alfalfa though. They don't like it. This is simply, there's nothing different about their bodies. It's a behavior difference where the honeybee's like, oh, I don't want to get hit on the head. They will only visit flowers that have already been opened by a different bee, or they'll do like nectar robbing on the side. So alfalfa bees are 15 times more effective at pollinating alfalfa than honeybees are. And this picture is from the USDA. You can see that they had just opened, like the pollen popped out and is flying through the air. So yeah, the alfalfa bee, like in the 1940s, the seed production was not doing great because the farms had gotten bigger and they were trying to use honeybees on the farms, but they didn't like pollinating alfalfa. So like somehow magically people discovered that leafcutter bees are really great at pollinating alfalfa. So they're one of the few hole nesting bees, like since the 40s, they've been raised on farms. So there's a better, how do I describe it? Like the industry does a better job of raising alfalfa leafcutter bees than mason bees. Mason bees are like a newer thing for the industries to use. And Crown Bees was trying to get the almond industry to use mason bees because they're designed for that springtime bloom. So I also like to talk about buzz pollination. For some flowers like this looks like a lily. The pollen is trapped inside of a tube. And the only way the pollen comes out is if a bee comes along and either shakes its head or like disengages its wings, but like shakes its body to make the pollen come loose. And it has to be at a certain frequency. Like I think it's like tone C to get the pollen to come out. bumblebees, sweat bees, and carpenter bees, these are the bees that I know so far are able to do that. Honeybees don't know how to, they don't know how to do it. So the plants that need this kind of buzz pollination to get the pollen loose are tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, blueberry, cranberry, and lilies. This is why tomatoes and hothouses, they use bumblebees to pollinate the greenhouse. The reason why I list potatoes, even though like, I'm gonna explain it in a second. Anyway, I've listed them for a reason. I think blueberry, maybe it's certain kinds that need the buzz pollination, but I think there's studies that show that bumblebees do a better job of pollinating blueberry fields than honeybees do, and other native bees. We don't know native bees that well. There might be other species that are doing buzz pollination too. We just don't know it. So this is a picture of, I think it's a sweat bee, and it's shaking to get the pollen out. To do buzz pollination, I think bees have to learn how to do it. It's a specialized thing. There's studies that show like older bumblebees teaching younger bumblebees how to do stuff, how to gather from complicated flowers. This is an example of evolution in real time. So I think this was the Netherlands. They did a study of growing mustard plants over 9 generations, and the plants that were raised with bumblebees, they grew taller and they produced more scent, and the flower structure had more of that UV reflection that we were talking about earlier, like the coloring. I mean, for us, these both look yellow, right? But the ones that were raised with hoverflies, I always say the word wrong, hoverflies, those plants became self-pollinating. They're shorter, they don't make as much scent. That has a big difference for plant genetics. So I think it's really interesting that pollinators can have this big effect on plant physiology. Even for perennial plants, I feel like in my previous yard, I had salmon berries in the back and I had an apple tree. As soon as the year after I raised mason bees, the next year I had more salmonberry flowers because there is a hormone transfer. The flower opens, when it gets pollinated, it sends a signal throughout the plant that goes all the way throughout the stem and the roots. And a perennial plant is going to be happier when there are pollinators. So when you add more, like I added mason bees to my yard, all of a sudden the plants were happier. I didn't just have bumblebees and hummingbirds in my backyard. So like ensuring that we have bee diversity is going to make our plants happier. I think there's also been studies that show, like if you have an herbal or medicinal plant, it's going to produce more oil, which is what we use to make medicine. So like increasing the diversity in our herbal gardens is also good if you're into making herbal medicine. So the last example of like how great, like I just said, that hormone signal, these are sweet potatoes. The bee pollination sends a signal throughout the plants. You can actually grow bigger crop roots. So potatoes and sweet potatoes, anything like tuber underground, you're letting it flower and you're bringing in bees can you tell how big these look like they're that big, sweet potatoes. So this is an example from Crown Bees had worked with the Giving Garden in Tennessee and shared leafcutter bees with them one summer. They grew 3 times as many sweet potatoes. They didn't do anything different with like water or fertilizer. It was because of the bees. The 1 year that they used leafcutter bees to pollinate everything in the garden that year. So even though we don't tend to make a connection between like potatoes and pollinators, they actually are helping us grow more food if we intentionally bring them and let them do their thing. So that's the end of all of that stuff. Next, we're finally going to get into bee life cycles. Do we want to take a break or keep going? Or are there any questions about pollination stuff? No? Is there anything you want to say, Steve?
I just another sort of some more, anecdotal evidence about, increasing the production in your gardens. We've kind of every year add a little bit more. Another thing the Common Acre does is community gardens and urban farms. And, every year we've added kind of more habitat, more native plants, more focus on having, pollinator friendly plants all around our vegetable gardens and our fruit producing trees and shrubs. And, and we have had a steady increase in the amount of food that we're growing. And it's at this much smaller scale than like a large farm, but we're still producing a pretty significant amount of food. And really, every year as we add more pollinator habitat, like I said, and then we're bringing in mason bees and doing different things, you really do notice a difference in your gardens. And so, you don't have to do all this at once, I think is the other beautiful thing, especially if you're a homeowner, or you're involved in a, community garden, you can kind of like add things little by little. And so I did just see a question come up about watering, and no, you're not going to drown the ground nesting bees. But what you can do is, and this is just a little habitat feature thing, is if you have a bird bath, or if you don't have anything like that, my favorite tip is those sort of terracotta pots. You can buy just the saucer, just the bottom, and that makes a great little watering dish, even a little plate, a little bowl. If I break a favorite piece of pottery or something like that, I just, then it becomes an outdoor bee watering dish. And then when you're out watering your gardens, if you do fill that up a little bit, you'll make your bee friends and your bird friends happy by having a water source. It's the thing we often forget about. And man, there's times when I like forget that to fill it up, and it's gone dry, and I'll go water it, and like they're like instantly, it's like a thirsty animal, and they're gonna come to get that water. So an often overlooked feature, that they do need a water source, but no, you won't drown them from watering our garden. Great question though.
One thing I like to point out, or I guess I have a question for you, Steve, is like, are you seeing more than honeybees visiting a watering dish? Because I have a feeling that native bees don't really need a watering dish so much. Like, don't stress out if you don't have a watering dish, because I think native bees are gathering dew from plants, and they're also drinking nectar. But for honeybees, what they have to do is, like, the honey is dried out, they have to reconstitute it, so they need the water. Honeybees need the water for sure, but I'm not sure about native bees.
It's mainly the bumblebees and honeybees that I notice. A lot of
and bumblebees are similar.
That's mainly what I notice. Utilizing the water that gets put out. For bumblebees, I wish I had a picture of the way their nests look. It looks like corn pops cereal. Like, they're these like globular, instead of a honeycomb hive, they have this like messy kind of like, it's like globs of stuff on top of each other, and they look like corn puffs. But the queen will make a little nectar pot, so that might be why she needs water, is like the nectar is drying out, and she has to like wet it so that they can drink it again. That's how I understand native, like, bees needing water. And the other tip when it comes to like being concerned about whether or not you might be disturbing some ground nesters is really just spend some time observing in your garden, and you might see like some spots where they're utilizing as a ground nest and be like, oh, I see they're kind of coming in and out over there. And then maybe you can set out some rocks or some other way to remind yourself like not to disturb that area, at least in that immediate part of the season. Because they're down there somewhere, odds are, and it's just a matter of kind of figuring out where in your garden, or your yard they have found a good spot to do that.
Okay, so now we're ready to talk about like when are bees active. So these are the stages of the their life. There's an egg, the larva part, there's like 5 stages of growth. Like it's called instars, I think. I don't know if that's the right word for bees, but anyway, like the larva gets bigger and bigger. Then it becomes a pupa. I don't know if I have pictures. Pupas look like adults, but they're kind of gross. They're all white. They don't have their wings or their hair, or there's no pigment yet. And then when they become adult, they look like a regular bee. They grow their hair and the wings and the pigment. The bee lifespans can be really short. For male bees, they're only adults for 2 weeks because the only job that they have is to mate. They do some pollination, like I said, but mostly they're there to mate. Female bees, their lifespan is around 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks if the weather is right and like the conditions are right. That's about the max of their adult lifespan. I like to remind us that bees are cold-blooded. So that means like for mason bees, the minimum temperature that they can start to come out is 53 degrees. And like I said earlier, they have to warm their bodies up to more than that. And there's different ways that they do that. And then in the fall, for all bees, they start to stop flying when temperatures get consistently below 60 degrees. So like that's the beginning and end of bee season throughout the year. In the winter, they're hibernating, or for honeybees, they're staying warm inside the hive. That's why, anyway, honeybees have this cycle where the queen is laying eggs throughout the winter so that the worker bees can keep her warm. That's the reason why they're you just don't see them because they're hiding out in their hive. So here is the spring mason bee life cycle. This is how mason bees live. So this is an example of one way of setting up their cycle for a bee. In the spring, they're emerging as fully formed adults that are ready to go as soon as that temperature is right and all the, like somehow they magically know the conditions are right, it's time to come out. In the spring, they have to mate first, and then the females start gathering pollen and nectar and laying the eggs. The larvae are slowly eating the pollen loaf. Like I've had one of those, Crown Bee sold a bee observer where there's like a clear window, and then that's where I got those pictures of the inside of the nest. It's kind of cool to watch them, like the larvae are like slowly eating the pollen loaf. And the way they do it, like they eat like a curved shape every day, like go through and like eat really slowly, eat the pollen loaf. Because mason bees only make 1 generation per year, this process can take a really long time for them. It take like more than a month for them to eat this pollen. Yeah, and then by early to midsummer, oh wait, no, later in the summer, after they eat the pollen loaf and they become big, they start to spin, the larva spins a cocoon around itself. And once it's inside the cocoon, that's when it pupates, becomes a pupa, and then it becomes an adult bee. So by the fall, they are hibernating as an adult bee. And over winter, they're hibernating as an adult until the next spring. So it's just the 1 generation per year. And the hibernating bees, they're adults, they're surviving, they're sleeping, they're feeding off of stored fats in their bodies. So when they come out, they're pretty hungry and they're ready to go. Knowing that climate change can really affect these hibernating bees that are hibernating as adults, because if the weather, and spring is really like every year is different, and the conditions, like the bees that come out in the spring, it's a real gamble for them. Like, is the weather going to be good? Are the flowers ready? But if they can do it right, there's only a few different kinds of bees that are out in the spring. Like, you think about it, we're not seeing a lot of different kinds of bees right now. They're really like gamblers in a way. So that's one way for a bee's life cycle to work, is 1 generation per year. They're spending most of their lives inside the nesting hole. They're only out for 4 to 8 weeks at a time, like during that 1 window of time that they're active. Another way for a bee life cycle to work is, like, this example is for summer leaf cutter bees. This is a little closer to like how a honeybee life cycle works. They are hibernating as larvae instead of as adults. So they require the warmth to cue them to develop into adult bees. So they need a certain amount of time, like certain temperature, like it's kind of like baking in an oven. Like they have to have like 70 degrees for 3 weeks long. Like some days are shorter, and so it really depends. They're cued by temperature. Same thing when they emerge, they may pollinate and they lay the eggs. Leafcutter bees are really cool. They make these cute little leafy cocoons. And it's just amazing that they build these little structures. With the eggs that are laid early in the summer, they eat the pollen loaf right away. Within 3 weeks, they emerge as an adult. They come back out and do this part of the cycle again, where they're emerging, mating, building a next generation. So then the late summer bees, instead of developing into adults, they hibernate as a larva and they wait over the fall. So for honeybees, they're not hibernating. They're going through the cycle over and over again of like laying eggs, becoming adults. And that's how honeybees work. So leafcutter bees are kind of similar, but like I said, like there's this time that they just don't fly in the winter. So don't worry if you don't see bees in the winter. They're not supposed to be out there. Even honeybees, they're not supposed to be flying in the winter. So that's the two main ways that bees, their life cycles work. Here's reasons to avoid lawn chemicals. Like the mason bees, they only fly, most native bees, they have a really short flying range because they're only adults for 4 to 6 weeks. So they're staying really close to home, like 300 feet. This means that the bees are very picky about where they nest and where they gather food and nectar. They're way pickier than honeybees are. The chemicals we apply in our yards, that's what you got to worry about for killing and drowning ground nesting bees. Because remember, for most of their life cycle, they are underground as this creature developing and waiting for the right conditions to come out. There's only a short window of the year that they're going to come out. Most of the time, they're in the nest as an egg, larva, or pupa, or a hibernating adult. So when you apply chemicals, it can like seep down into where their nests are, and that can kill them. It can also impair their memory. There's all of these, I'm going to go into that, like why, like it can, if it's not lethal, it's harming them in a different way. Bee-safe chemicals are only tested for the way honeybees behave. Honeybees are not living underground. They're living in a hive in a box, or under a tree limb, or in someone's attic, or they're not living underground, most of them. And the bee-safe chemicals like the EPA or whatever is testing, they're only using honeybees as an example of bees. We are pushing them to not do that anymore because native bees, all of these species, they live totally differently than honeybees. They interact with the landscape in a totally different way. I like to point out, like, ground nesting bees are in the ground, but the hole nesting mason bees, leafcutter bees, wool carder bees, they're gathering materials, natural materials, bringing it back into the nest and putting it right next to the egg. So even if they're not nesting underground, they're gathering mud, or they're gathering leaves that could be sprayed with chemicals, or they're gathering like the fuzzy hairs of a plant. They're bringing all of this stuff back into the nest. That's why we shouldn't use chemicals. We have no idea like where they're interacting. Like, it's just safer to not use chemicals. We have no idea how it affects the native bees because the stuff's not being tested for native bees. Like I just said, bees are using natural materials inside the nest, even if they're not underground. There is no safe time to apply a chemical because if the bee is an adult and it's flying around, she's going back underground to build a next nest. If she's not flying, then the bees that are in the ground are either an egg, larva, or pupa, or hibernating. So throughout the year, that whole year, there's no time when they're not there. Like, they're always there. So it's not like they come and go. They're like, your yard is their home. A good resource for pesticide alternatives or like tips for avoiding is pesticides.org, beyondpesticides.org. I wish I knew more, but like the suggestion I have is avoid lawn chemicals as much as possible. Another reason to avoid lawn chemicals is our watersheds for salmon and trout. The kokanee salmon is a local salmon that doesn't go out to the ocean. They live as an adult in Lake Sammamish. They are extremely, I don't know, they're not, I think they might be listed as endangered. If you get to know the Three Rivers Trout Unlimited group, they are working really hard to save the kokanee salmon. And part of what's harming them is all of our lawn chemicals killing insects in the creek, and like kind of messing with the chemical structure of the lake. I'm going to talk more about why chemicals are not good. Neonic pesticides, they are systemic pesticides that seeds are treated with a neonicotinoid pesticide. The seeds are coated. Studies show that this kind of pesticide impairs memory for adult bees. If it doesn't outright kill them, it impairs their memory, and it makes it harder for bees to learn how to feed from complex flowers. So it can make it so they can't remember how to get back to their nest. There's also studies showing that neonic pesticides impairs fertility for both male and female bees. Remember earlier I said to make a female egg, you have a viable egg and sperm. If the sperm doesn't work, the egg's going to grow into a male bee. And then you're not going to have females to, produce the next generation. So you need male fertility with bees in order to keep bees going. And neonic pesticides, they can persist in the landscape for years after they've been applied. I think I've heard that some pesticides, they can stay in the landscape for 7 years afterwards. And this graphic from the UK is showing that a lot of the seed coating gets leached into the soil. 2019 through part of 2020, I was on the Washington State Pollinator Health Task Force, which is a brand new thing that they did. We debated the seed coating thing because there's no good regulation on it. And the seed producers are outside the state, and it's really hard to not get treated seeds for certain crops. It's really frustrating that that's the way things are, because we don't do enough to protect our pollinators. So some of what we were suggesting to the legislation is we need to know what's going on. Like, we need to be able to advocate for untreated seed. If a farmer wants to do untreated seed, they should have access to that. So anyway, neonics, it's a big thing. And a lot of people don't even know about what neonics are. You can buy a plant from the nursery that's been treated with neonics, and you don't even know that it's been treated. I think the Home Depot had a couple of years ago on their own, they made labels that said this has not been treated, so that you have the peace of mind that the plant you're buying has not been treated with this stuff. And the gardening and agriculture companies, they like neonics because the plant is not eaten by like anything that eats it dies, or the way neonics work is on the brain system of an insect. So that's why it harms their memory and their ability to learn. A lot of times when I give this presentation, I have at least one person who has never ever heard of neonics, and they are just so frustrated. This is something that exists, and I think they were developed in the 90s, and it was like this great new thing because it's killing all of the pests that every part of the plant is protected because it's systemic. It's in every part of the tissue. So it's in the leaves, the roots, the flowers, the stems, everything. And so no creatures are able able to eat that. But there are recent studies showing deer and birds are dying because of neonic applications. And it's kind of like DDT. We haven't learned that the bioaccumulation, like what a small thing eats a bigger thing eats a small thing, and then it goes up the food chain until we are killing the big animals that we need. So I'll just like get off my soapbox about neonics, but it's something to know about and like be aware. Push your nurseries. Like when you're talking to them, like say, I want to make sure that this has not been treated. I don't want to add a plant like this to my garden because it's going to stay with that plant for as long as it's living because it's systemic. So you can ask your nurseries, like, can you guarantee that this has not been treated? And sometimes they won't even know because they're getting it from a bigger vendor that's just mass applying the stuff to the plants. Do neonic pesticides transfer to the seeds of treated plants? I'm not sure. It would kind of make sense that it would a little bit, but I don't know. Do you know, Steve?
No, I don't. That is a good question. I would think if it's a nasty enough pesticide that it would, yes, it would.
I think so, because I think part of what's harming the bees is they're drinking the nectar that's got it in it, and then it must also be in the pollen. So it must transfer somehow, and maybe it's not as strong as the original coating, but yeah, there's definitely like I think drift where that kind of pesticide is applied, like it's drifting to the surrounding areas and it's harming the wildlife around it. So I know this is like a downer to talk about, but the more we're aware, and like we can all, like when you see someone posting about like sign this petition, like you know why it's important. Oh, so plants that feed bees. Well, now we can learn about what we can do to help bees. Like no more Debbie Downer. Each adult female bee can visit 2,000 flowers a day. Debbie Downer. Okay, so 2,000 flowers a day. That might be a low estimate. It might be like 4,000 a day, like something crazy. So knowing that bees can visit so many flowers, you want to provide plants that have a whole bunch of flowers on them, or studies show that native flowering plants are 4 to 5 times more attractive to bees of all kinds. And there are specialist bees that need their special native flowers in order to pollinate. One example is death camas. There is a death camas bee that is able to survive the toxic pollen and all the other toxic parts of the plant. Death camas bees, because death camas is lower in population, we need more camas fields, really. I think I found a death camas the other night and I was like, awesome. Like, I'm not gonna eat it, but yay, there's a death camas. Does that mean it's like death camas bees can exist? So anyway, there's like, if you plant native flowers, chances are there's going to be a specialized bee that needs that plant, and your yard can be a part of this oasis that the bee needs. The other groups of flowers that are good to grow are anything that produces food for us to eat. The flowers are really great at feeding bees. Herbal plants like oregano and thyme and rosemary, and then I don't know, the other like calendula, like herbal plants, those are all great. And then yeah, plants that are medicinal are also, they tend to have like, they attract bees. And then asters are, remember I said bees evolved 135 million years ago. Aster flowers like this showy fleabane, this purple one, they have this open daisy shape. That's the oldest flower that's evolved with bees. Like it was one of the first flowers to evolve and exist. So anything in the aster family, daisies, sunflowers, Those are all really great for bees because they're actually easier to feed from too. Like you don't have to have a special super long tongue. So those tend to be really popular with bees and other insects. So I was going to talk about some of my favorite native plants. And Steve, feel free to jump in if you want to talk about these plants or other plants. So salmonberry, I think salmonberry doesn't get enough love in the landscaping world, but I love the flowers. They remind me of Thumbelina every time I see them. They bloom in the early spring. I think they're blooming right now. And the bees and creatures that visit them are bumblebee queens, mason bees, and hummingbirds. And I love seeing hummingbirds feed from them too. It's super cute. They like shade to part sun, and the soil has to be wet for them to establish. Like they have to have a certain time of year that it's got to be wet. They're really great for soil erosion control. Oh, and I think the fruits are okay. They're edible, but I don't know. I think there's tastier flowers or tastier fruit. Trailing blackberry is my favorite blackberry, and if you can find it while it's before other creatures come and eat it, then like you're really lucky. They bloom early to mid-spring. Bumblebees and mason bees, and also there's 4 different kinds of butterflies where the trailing blackberry, this is the native one, native plant. There's 4 different butterflies that use the trailing blackberry as a host. It was even on the news a couple of years ago that the tiger swallowtail had a boom in population, and they were saying, oh, it's like it might be related to climate change. And I was like, that's a good sign that we've got trailing blackberries because that's one of the host plants. Oh, let's see. I don't remember if, yeah. So this plant likes shade to part sun. It needs moist ground. And you can train them to grow. You can train them to grow on a trellis or a ladder. The trailing blackberry was actually, I think, one of the breeds that were crossbred to create loganberry or marionberry. So when you eat, like that's where that flavor comes from. And the trailing blackberry is like the tastiest berry, like one of the best berries ever. And when I lived out on the peninsula, I remember people would pay $20 a pint, and that was like 20, 30 years ago. So I don't know how much people pay now, but that's how tasty they are. Like they are so good. I got really lucky last summer. I found a really good patch and I went there every day. I still have it in my freezer, but like I was so happy because I've been living in Washington State forever. And this was like the first time that I found a big enough patch to like gather a lot and make a cobbler, and like it was really special. So if you can keep an eye out for it and find it. The vines are a gray-green color. So don't pull every blackberry you see. Like make sure that what you're pulling and getting rid of is actually the invasive ones, because that gray-green vine, that's a native one, and they're really tasty, and you're lucky to have them growing in your yard. Thimbleberry is another one of my favorites. They bloom later in the spring, and I've seen bumblebees on them. I haven't seen a lot of other bees visit them, but this is one native plant that actually likes full sun. A lot of our native plants, they need some part shade, but this one really goes great in full sun. I think it's a pretty landscaping plant because the leaves, when the leaves come out, they're these beautiful, soft, fuzzy, huge leaves. Like the foliage is really pretty. And they do need well-drained soil. So if you got a spot that's drier, that's in full sun, then thimbleberry should do well. The berries are high in pectin. So if you like to make jam, but this is another berry where it's like birds will eat them. So you got to go out, like keep an eye and like pick them as soon as they're ready. So their berries are really tart, and I feel like it burns my tongue. Like I can't just eat a whole bunch of thimbleberries, but you can add them to your jam and it will help your jam set. Common yarrow. So these are pictures that I took at the Common Acre Green Line site. They bloom later, or actually they bloom from spring through fall. So they're really great, like all season. They're attracting to everything. So bees, wasps, ladybugs, butterflies. I've seen the hoverflies. It's like every bug loves this plant. It likes full sun. It can grow in poor soil. So if you don't have great soil, it's going to help build your soil. They're also drought tolerant. Oh, if you have a problem with aphids, grow yarrow near the aphid problem, and it will attract the ladybugs that you need to eat the aphids. It's also a really great bee lawn. If you can find the yarrow that's dwarf style, it can handle being mowed every so often, and it's gonna still it makes a really great lawn to walk on too, because the leaves are soft and squishy. Clover, I don't know if this is actually a clover picture, and that I took that picture. It's the bee that's on there is a wool carder. It's a male one. These are really cool looking. We have native wool carders, but the European ones are more well known. My leg's falling asleep, but I like them. They look like little tanks. But clover blooms spring through summer. I know we have native clovers, so they're good for bees and wasps and maybe butterflies too. Clover likes full sun and poor soil. They're also drought tolerant, and clover's in the family that's a nitrogen fixer. So if you have bad soil and you want to build the nutrients up, then grow clover. And it's a symbiotic relationship in the roots. So there's a bacteria that can take the nitrogen from the air and put it into a form that plants can use. And clover also makes a really good bee lawn plant. The only thing is, I feel like it's hard for me to be sure that the clover I'm planting is native and not an outsider. So I haven't figured out a source for clover seeds. Camas blooms in the early spring. I should have made this sequential, but it's one of my favorite plants that I started raising. Mason bees and bumblebees like to visit camas. It likes full sun and poor soil. It would be great if you have a prairie habitat. It is also a traditional indigenous food source. The only thing is, I wouldn't recommend gathering it unless you are working with a traditional knowledge holder, because there's definitely certain ways to do it. Steve's saying that Northwest Meadowscape sells native clover seeds. That's good to know, because I want to add it to my yard too. But I took this picture of a mating pair of mason bees on the camas. That was last spring. I found a patch of camas growing in my suburban neighborhood, and I was so excited to find them. They kind of they spread. But the bulbs are, we're over scheduled time. Okay, yeah, I think I'm pretty close to the end of my presentation. I know this takes a while to go through. So now resources. So the Common Acre, they're in Seattle. The Green Line Project, this picture of the big leaf mountain lupine, that's from the Green Line. The Flight Path is another project that Common Acre has been working on. We do a lot of programming about wild bee education and conducting bee surveys. And then the bee guide is really great. I like how it's organized based on where the bees are carrying pollen, because that is your biggest clue about identifying the bee species. Oh no, sorry. Actually, there's a bunch. I forgot. It's been a while since I've done this one. So these are amazing facts about bees that are super cool and fun to know. I did this because kids were at this class, and I was like, bees are super smart. Bees understand the concept of the number 0. And for humanity, that has only occurred 3 or 4 times around the world, where here's the idea of nothingness, a 0 represents nothing. So bees know what that means too. Or bees know, I'm not saying, bees understand 0 also. Bees can add or subtract. and bees can count from 0 to 4. They can do simple math. It makes sense, like for the bees that are living underground and they like, okay, I'm 2 down and then that's mine. You know, they need to be able to count in some situation. Bees can also feel and understand shapes. So I can't remember, there's a scientific term for like, if you're digging in your pocket and you're trying to find your keys, like you can feel the difference between keys and chapstick. Bees can do the same thing where they're like in a dark room, this is a sphere and this is a cube, like, and the way that they set up these, all of these research things it's just crazy. And it's really fun to read them though. So like it sounds like hard to do or whatever, but it's actually really interesting. Bumblebees can play soccer because like I said, bees need to learn how to feed from complex flowers. If you look up these YouTube videos, the bees are teaching each other how to like move a ball into, like the scientists train them to move the ball into a goal or pull on a string and then they get the little nectar drink. So bees can teach each other how to feed from these complex flowers. And if you watch the YouTube video, I'm like really jealous of the scientist that gets to like teach bees how to play soccer. And then like, that's his job, is to teach bees how to play soccer. Oh, I did talk about the bee ocelli, but here's another picture that shows that they have those 3 simple eyes, the eyes polarize light, just like sunglasses, and they read that to tell the time of day or direction. So this is just a good picture of those 3 eyes on the top of their head and why they're important. Bees are very gentle too. That's a picture that I took of a bee on my finger. And holding a mason bee, it's a lot like holding a ladybug. Like I was scared the first time, but then I realized this is like holding a ladybug. Like it's like fun and kind of cute. And just like, you know, you hold a ladybug and they poop on you and then they fly away. Like a mason bee is going to do that too sometimes. Anyway, I still recommend that you be respectful and watch bees from a distance. And also remember, solitary bees, they're not going to form a swarm. Like if one's mad at you, that's the only one that's going to be mad at you. It's not going to call its friends over. Oh, I also like to just point out there are bees in the Arctic. I took this photo of a bumblebee on fireweed. And we have bumblebees that pollinate cloudberry in Inupiaq. They're called Inupiaq. We also have a whole bunch of different kinds of blueberry. I think some of them are true blueberry. Some of them are Arctic honeyberry, which is I think like a kind of honeysuckle. We also have cranberries. Like there's a whole bunch of different fruiting plants that the bumblebees are feeding on. Oh, so Xerces Society is another good resource. This stuff is all mixed up, but they have pollinator planting guides based by bioregion. It tells you the bloom times for the plants, what the plants need in terms of water, so you can put it in the right kind of, make sure you have the right natural conditions where you're not working extra hard to water them, and then planting tips. Pollinator Parkways is located in Portland. But she has a free do-it-yourself habitat manual where she's explaining to you how, you know, there's a sidewalk and then there's a grass strip. Sometimes people call it health strips. So her manual is about how to flip the strip from just grass to native plants. She includes some nesting sites like logs and whatever. And then the plants that she's recommending, they have multiple bloom times so that throughout the year, there's something for them. So I like recommending this as a resource. Yeah, they have a little website where it's a free manual. And then Pollinator Week is every year, right like around summer solstice. And so what I did for crown bees was the last summer was the last time I was working with them, and I would share these interesting facts about bees every day for Pollinator Week. So it's a good idea to connect with pollinator.org. They do tend to focus more on honeybees and butterflies, but we need them to talk about native bees. I think that's it. Sorry, I know I ended up going overtime. But I'm happy to answer any more last questions.
Yeah, and while we wait for people to see if anyone has any questions, I'm going to drop a link. If you've been to a wetland workshop before, you know that I always do this, but it's a link for a post survey to help with our grant reporting, just to have a better idea of like the demographics of people that we're reaching. And so if you have time, please fill it out. I'll also follow up with an email with the link and also the recording of today's workshop.
It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. So informative. We were just mesmerized for 2 hours straight. That's amazing. Thank you.
Can we get on there?
Yeah, I think that was like such a great presentation and some of the cutest facts I've ever heard about like you taking your like sad bee out to see a flower and sit in the sun.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't, I feel like I should have given more time to Stephen to talk or.
No, this is my plan all along, Demarus, is I was just like, you know, she's just I'm gonna hit play and she's just gonna go and I can just color with some facts here and there. So thank you so much. I love hearing your stuff. And you know, I'll send over, we can do a little resource list share as well. And then when you send out that follow-up, you can include those different ways for different, you know, resources for people to learn more about all this and to get involved in different things happening in their neighborhoods and communities to help out and to learn. I think that's the other thing is I'm all about kind of learning by doing. And so by getting out and seeing what like our organization and other practitioners are doing, it really things you can then bring and apply to your own neighborhoods and gardens and communities, which is what we're all about.
Cool. Yeah, and it'll take, you know, like a global effort that we're gonna have to put in to help our pollinators make it through all the challenges they're facing right now. So just like any other thing we can all do really does make a difference.
Yeah, I'm hoping that like when people understand how bees actually live, they can start to think like a bee and then go and like make your garden attractive to bees, and also like don't stress about winter time because they're not really flying during then. But also for some things you can take it easy, like don't even bother with clearing anything out. Oh yeah, one thing I always forget to point out, because this is more like for people who want to take care of butterflies and moths, like leave the leaves or take the leaves from your grass and push them off to underneath the trees, because some cocoons actually look like leaves that are folded over. So it's definitely like insects that you can't tell that they're there. So, and I don't know, I feel kind of bad, like this is a bunch of like data dump on everybody, but hopefully there's something practical that you can go do. Oh yeah, maple blossoms are actually a really good food source for mason bees and bumblebees. It's not their favorite, but they will go to them if there's not a lot else. It's also like the Ravenna or Thornton Creek area. There's a big population of native mason bees over there. I think there's a lot of maple trees. You can also eat maple blossom flowers. They're blooming right now. You can go trim some, and there's plenty of flowers for, like you're not gonna hurt the tree if you pick some and make maple blossom fritters.
Or pancakes.
I know about it, but I haven't gone and tried it. Like I missed it last year.
Sometimes they're very high up too, and it's a hard time to get them. Also, quick announcement. Demarus mentioned this a couple times throughout the presentation. She sort of like, inadvertently talked about traditional medicines, and we have a workshop next month on traditional medicine, and it's scheduled for May 22nd. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for that.
Oh, just because they're blooming right now, and I wish I want to add them to my, but red flowering currant is a really great springtime native plant, and you can actually cut the flowers and make a tincture that's supposed to be mood boosting, so like, and stress relieving too. You can either like store them in alcohol or water. It's like I know about it, but I haven't actually done it.
Mhm. Okay, I have a follow-up question just for you bee employees, I suppose. Essentially work for the bees, right? Is when you have the like if you have potlucks or something with your bee friends, like the humans, does anyone ever make like a pollen loaf cake or something? And if not,
So when I worked at Crown Bees, like one of the things that the owner of the company, Dave, he would love to do with the new people is force them to eat a mason bee pollen loaf, because sometimes they forget to lay an egg, or the egg doesn't hatch and it kind of shrivels up and goes away. But I resisted for a while because it sounded kind of gross, but I finally tried it out, and it's kind of got like a weird bitter taste, but it's like also kind of sweet. It's kind of hard to describe, but I don't know of anyone using it for baking, but it's, I don't know. It's not the cleanest thing because there's dried mud in between each thing. So like taking it out, you have to be really careful so you don't get a bunch of dirt too. But I've tried it all by itself, but not adding it to baking, but that's an interesting idea. But I think for honeybee pollen, they don't mix it with honey, so it's not as sweet. Like it's definitely more bitter. But there's like a medicinal use for them because it's got all that vitamins in it.
right.
Steve, do you know what propolis is?
I am not the expert on that. I don't know if anyone.
I know what propolis is.
I know that it's really good for you. So go ahead and tell us more.
I'm pretty sure it's the goo that they use to stick their stuff together, and it has like tons of medicinal properties. It's like really, really good for cold sores if you get them, to just put it on, and it tastes pretty good too.
Yeah, and you can usually find it if you don't know a beekeeper. It's gotten, you can usually find it at your local co-op or natural food store. And yeah, I personally don't take it as a supplement, but I've heard it's like remarkably good for you.
I always thought it looked like tree sap. Like, are they gathering tree sap somehow and then adding it, like mixing it with saliva or something? I don't know exactly what is it made by the bee, or?
I think it's made by the bee, but it could be mixed with something. It's super sweet, like sweeter than tree sap is, for those of us that have tasted. But it could be mixed with, maybe they have some sort of like sugar store in their bodies that they mix that with or something. Cool. Well, it looks like pretty much everyone's gone. So thank you so much for coming, both of you. It was so great. I hope that.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. This is so fun. Thanks for having us.
I'll follow up with
Thank you, and you're welcome. And I guess you feel free to share my Sustainable Seattle email with people if anybody have any other questions or want more resources or something. Actually, I've got a document that I can share with you to share as a resource with everybody else. So.
Yeah. So go ahead and share that, and I'll put together a little bit of something with some of the things that we talked about, came up with, and didn't get to, and you can share that with people as well.
Yeah, I'll probably aim to have that follow-up email done or come out on Tuesday. Does that work for you guys?
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Cool.
All
Well,
right.
thank
Thanks
you.
again.
Yeah, nice to
Have a good weekend, y'all.
Bye-bye.